Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar. I'm Andrew Morris from IRM UK, and today I'm joined by a panel of service design enthusiasts and experts. We're going to be discussing the topic of service design and going beyond those assumptions and chartering a course to clearer service design. Service design is a fairly young profession in terms of the wider business world, and today we hope to kind of debunk some myths and kind of pave the way to more efficient service design. So I'm going to hand over to our other panelists to give a short introduction into themselves and their experience. We are expecting one more panelist to join in a couple of minutes, just running a little bit late from the busy world of service design. And then so while they're doing their introductions, I'm going to pop a short poll on screen just so we can get a better understanding of where you guys are in terms of your service design journey, whether you're just exploring, whether you're kind of in the middle or the start of a project, or whether you've got a fully established service design function. So that'll pop up on screen now. And then if I can hand over to Chris first for an introduction.
Hi everyone. My name is Chris Brain. I've worked in and around the public sector for just over 20 years now. And the last, I'd probably say the last 12 of those years have been in the user-centered and kind of digital design space. My background is predominantly in the public sector and more specifically in central government. And I've worked with a range of bits of government, some of the big bits of government like the Department for Education, the Cabinet Office, the Home Office, the Department for Education, well, I already said Cabinet Office, and some of the smaller bits as well, like the Home Office, Lands Registry and the Food Standards Agency. I'm currently working with the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities in a service design role, looking at the creation of a new ombudsman scheme for the private rental sector. So that's me.
Thanks. Jonathan?
Brilliant. So hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Hunsley. I'm the Service Development Director for Assist Knowledge Development. I was looking the other day, I was talking with Chris and Andrew about it. I've been in and around service design for about a decade. My experience, in contrast to Chris, is predominantly in the financial services sector. I've also worked in automotive and consultancy. For my sins, I'm the Chief Architect of the A4Q Certified Service Designer qualification. And I've got a background in business analysis and business architecture, and I'd be interested to see where this comes up in discussion, but I see massive overlaps with the toolkits of the professionals that are in the business analysis and business architecture, and there's other professions as well. But really, really excited to be here today. So thank you for the invite, Andrew.
Wonderful. Thanks both for those introductions. So the poll went out, and kind of want to see what your thoughts are, really. So just under half of the audience say that they're in the stages of kind of a new function or just finding their feet. Then shortly followed by just interesting and kind of researching what service design is. And then just a couple of people who have either an established service or a fully embedded and integrated service design function. Is that kind of where you'd expect people to be, a good split?
That correlates with what I would have thought would have been the result of the poll, Andrew. Yeah, so it is a new profession and people are trying to find their way and trying to work out what it is and how might they do it and how might they build capability in this area. And I think that's a symptom of where the professional discipline is of service design, that a lot of people are new to it.
And Chris, obviously you've worked in a few different places under either service design or kind of very adjacent roles. Is that what you see when we're going into a new place? Do you find that a lot of people are just finding their feet and trying to explore? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that the UK government, through the work that the Government Digital Service kind of initiated probably 15 years or so ago, means that some aspects or some parts of the public sector of UK government are maybe a little bit more mature than others. But yeah, on the whole, looking across different sectors, yeah, I think this is a fairly representative of kind of the state of play out there.
Great, perfect. Yeah, that's interesting. So if I move into our first question, then, which probably leads quite nicely from that poll, then. So if I jump back to you again, Chris. So the question is around what are kind of the fundamental aspects that make up service design, and and what does service design offer to organizational strategies and kind of enhancing customer experiences?
Yeah, so for me, if there's two things that people take away from today, at least that come out of my mouth, it feels like something I should say at the end actually, but would be that essentially service design is good for two reasons. Service design is good for the user. It enables us to create services that users can actually use and do the things that users need from them, or the things that customers need. But it's also good for the organization providing it, for the service provider or for the business. It means that, or it enables us to create and design services that are profitable or that deliver cost savings, but also ones that are easy to run. And the reason for that is that service design enables us not only to take a user-centered approach to designing our services and the way that people outside interact with our organization or with our business. It also now enables us to reimagine and redesign what our business organization structures look like. So there's for me, there's two elements to it. There's that kind of that front-facing, kind of customer-facing aspect, which is could be websites, buttons, telephone systems, etc. Essentially, we make things easy for people to use. The second stage, and perhaps the latter stage of maturity here, is around organizing our structure, our internal structures, in a way that enables us to, or is aligned with our customers' mental models of our service. So we align ourselves with those services, so that almost by default, all of the decisions that we make and everything that we do, by definition, is aligned with our users' needs and expectations.
Great. Jonathan, would you agree, or what are your thoughts on what Chris has said and anything else?
So yeah, and the first point that Chris made around it's good for the user. I typically use the word customer, but the two can be interchangeable. But it's good for the customer, it's good for the organization, and so I find it quite interesting. I don't think there's a good reason to not do service design. Why would you not want to look after your customers, your stakeholders, and do things that are good for your organization, for your business? It's a discipline that's holistic, so it encompasses all touch points, the technology touch points, the people touch points, any process touch points, business rules and others. It's, for me, part of it's about a mindset of being outcome focused, being customer centric, as we've talked about, being willing to experiment and be creative and innovate. But a big part of service design from my perspective is the mindset of collaboration. So we're going to co-create value with our stakeholders. And this means that we've got to be open and transparent. We've got to make objective-based decisions with regard to the designs of the services. And we've got to be willing and able to challenge each other to try and push the boundaries to make our services even better than they are at the moment. The other thing that I'm going to mention, and I think this is at the heart of service design as well, I think that service design is a discipline that brings in quite a few different thinking approaches. And I think there are 4 core thinking approaches. So there's systemic thinking. So what is the system there for? What are its emergent properties? What are different perspectives on it? Service thinking, which is the study of value co-creation, that understanding that it's only the customer that can determine value. We can only ever offer value, and looking at how do we improve outcomes for customers. Design thinking is a big part of it. So I really like the double diamond. There are other approaches, obviously, but really understanding problems, doing divergent and convergent thinking around them, and then using the same divergent convergent thinking around solutions. So we get practical solutions to the problems, opportunities in our organizations. And then the final thinking approach that I think is part of the service design thinking approach is lean thinking. And this is all about customer, it's all about enhancing flow and enhancing quality. Now, each of those thinking approaches comes with an underpinning toolkit. And one of the things I'd say is the essence of service design is trying to apply that toolkit in the context of trying to do things that are appropriate for your customer, and you're doing the right thing for the business, which is the point that Chris made very eloquently. It's trying to look at these thinking approaches, this mindset, and try and do the right thing. And it's not easy. I'm not going to pretend that this is easy, but I think it's really worthwhile for organizations, and it's a really worthwhile professional discipline to get involved in as well, because you're making tangible improvements to your organization, and you have the potential to do so anyway.
Oh, great, that sounds good. And you kind of answered a little bit a follow-up question I was going to ask, which is like around the fundamental aspects. If there had to be one thing you would recommend to somebody or suggest to somebody they have to really hone in and get right, would that collaboration piece be one of the top ones, or is there anything else you think would be a number one priority?
I'd say, in terms of the mindset, I don't think you can do service design without collaboration. You can't do it on your own. You have to have different perspectives, and you've got to look at data objectively, challenge assumptions, and I'd say that in terms of the mindset, that's absolutely fundamental. If we're going to drive out these customer and organizational outcomes, we have to collaborate. And I think it's on each and every service designer to demonstrate that as just a routine behavior. They've got to be able to collaborate. They've got to be able to be trustworthy with their stakeholders. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to design and deliver the new and improved services. So yeah, Andrew, I'd agree. Yeah, collaboration really key for me anyway.
Chris, I can see you nodding your head. Is that a resounding yes from you as well? Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly with everything Jonathan said. And I actually feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes if people ask me kind of what my role is or what role I'm working in at any one time, at least when I'm in a service designer role, because even the term service designer as a title kind of feels that it's that individual's responsibility to design the service. Whereas, as Jonathan's explained, as a for service design to work properly or wow, it requires input from lots of different disciplines, people with different experiences, people from different perspectives, not just kind of user-centered design specialists. So typically you'd have potentially researchers and potentially other designers and business analysts and people in product kind of roles, as well as potentially some developers or kind of technologists, but also people with subject matter expertise, people who understand the domain, who might not have previously kind of worked in this kind of service design space, but getting input from those subject matter experts in that collaborative way, as Jonathan mentioned, is really to me the key element of successful service design, rather than just having somebody that's called a service designer.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, Pip. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Slightly flustered.
That's fine. All busy as a service designer, right? Never ends.
Absolutely, never ends. These customers.
Great. Do you want to give the audience kind of just a quick overview into kind of who you are and your bit of experience?
Yes, so I'm Pip Hall. I am a business analyst for Talent Technology Services. I call myself a business analysis professional. I don't like sitting in boxes. So I also include in that some service design work and some change management work and, some SME domain work from my previous experience as a customer in the public sector. So I'm doing a lot of work in my organisation to change mindsets, as Jonathan was just talking about, into broadening them to include almost anybody that we interact with as a customer, and to consider who they are and what they want and how we're able to meet those needs, or at least acknowledge those needs, and in some cases to help the customers work out what it is that they want, because we're not able to provide a service to them unless they know what they want. And sometimes that collaboration that Chris and John were just talking about is all about, the customer is very much part of that. So unless they are also articulate and clear about what they want, then we're not able to design the services that they want. So spending a lot of time with customers as well, talking about not just necessarily, as you would expect a business analyst to do, talking about the individual requirements, but what it is they're trying to achieve, what's the outcome they want to get to by specifying the requirements that they have done. So that's my day job, loving the service design element of it. I think service design is a lens on this much broader environment in which I work. So yeah, that's who I am.
Great, thanks, Pip. Okay, so then obviously we've talked about the fundamental aspects, and I want to move on now to kind of some of these factors that have kind of sprung service design into a realm of its own, and kind of how it's been shaped and formed recently. So I suppose, Chris, if I go to you again, because you've got quite a lengthy experience in either service design or adjacent roles, kind of where is this coming from? What's this all about?
Yeah, so I mean, services as a service as a thing has existed, I guess, for as long as people have, right? Like, for as long as any one person or group of people have helped another person, another group of people, services have been provided, right? So the concept of like a service isn't a new thing, and providing that service probably requires some kind of, even if it's unintentional, kind of design, right? So even if it's subconscious. So service design, like in the literal sense, has kind of existed forever. But I think the catalyst here to kind of service design as a professional service design as a mindset or an approach in the way that we're talking about it now has really come, it's kind of been born out from the changes to the world, frankly, that have happened probably over the last 20 years. You know, the world's become more complex, the world's become more digital, and people expect a lot more from services now than they would have done, say, 20 years ago, a couple of decades ago. I mean, just thinking about, I mean, just try and put context on it. Just think about like expectations of a mobile phone now compared to what our expectations of a mobile phone might have been, say, in 2004. I did a little bit of thinking on this actually. I looked up what the best-selling phone 20 years ago was, and it was a Nokia, or part of the Nokia 2610 range. Didn't have a camera, didn't have access to the internet. Touchscreens didn't come about or weren't available, at least in the UK, for another 3 years. So you think about what we expect of a phone now and all of the kind of features and functionality that you would expect and things you'd be able to do with a phone now compared to what you would have done 20 years ago. But the same also applies to thinking about a car or something like getting a passport. Like our expectations and customers' expectations are completely different. And those changes haven't just happened kind of, overnight, as it were. They've changed, and they're continuing to change more and more quickly. So we see this kind of change, I suspect, kind of led by technology and the ability that technology provides. But this is kind of ramping up more quickly and quickly year on year. And so the idea of just like turning what were like analog interactions, like sending letters by post, into digital ones, like sending things by email or using like a web form or instant messaging, that isn't enough. That kind of computerization or that sort of digitization isn't enough to maintain the pace that we need to meet users' expectations. So rather than like just modernizing and trying to apply our existing like service delivery model into a new channel, or trying to use the latest thing to try and do the same thing, service design has enabled businesses and organizations to, a bit like I said before, actually kind of reimagine and redesign the way they provide services and even what their services are, which means that they've been able to that they're able to pivot more quickly. So by staying in touch with our users and their needs, as Pip was talking about, spending time with our users, we're able to more quickly understand and identify when their needs and their expectations change and evolve, and we're able to respond to those more quickly because of some of the things that Jonathan was talking about in terms of kind of like the kind of creative co-design and co-creative activities that enable us to kind of ideate different ways of doing things and come up with more creative ways that we can solve problems. And because we're always getting feedback from our users, we're getting that insight into whether not only our current service works for users or where it doesn't, but we can also get feedback about whether our ideas will solve the problems we've identified. So that that probably came across as a bit waffly, but I guess in a nutshell, I think service design, as we're talking about it today, has really been the necessary response to the speed at which customers' expectations and needs and behaviours are changing, and will continue to change for at least as far as I can see.
Absolutely. And Pip, you've recently been you're still on a fairly new service design journey. What's been the drivers for that? Where did that come from?
In 2 places, I agree with everything that Chris has said, but while he was talking, I was thinking actually there's two other aspects, certainly as far as I'm concerned, and they're very much interlinked. So, we need to remain competitive in our market. And in order to remain competitive in our market, we need to be clever, intelligent, efficient, effective in the way that we spend our resources. So actually, part of the driver that I am responding to in my service design activities is trying to get what the customers want, B, in the most resource efficient manner that we're able to, and C, to put the bells and whistles on that we can glean from all the collaborative activities and all the design thinking and system thinking that we do in order to gain that market share, which might otherwise go to our competitors. So that's, for me, that whole economic climate is definitely one of the drivers, and is what I think has definitely contributed to the rising prominence of service design more recently. As far as I'm concerned, as I said just now, I spent 20 years as a customer in the public sector, and my move to the private sector was both incredibly enlightening for me, but also has motivated. I am constantly, daily motivated to be the service provider that I wanted when I was that customer. And I think having, like I said, in this digital world, in this economic climate that we're in, having that motivation, being that person that's offering what the customer wants rather than the customer having to do the hard work to find you, is actually a really big draw for service design activities within our organisation.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Jonathan, what's your thoughts?
So absolutely, the commercial pressures, the pressures from customers, because we expect more, absolutely key factors that are leading to the desire for and demand for service design. I think budgetary pressures is also a factor. So particularly in the UK, in local government, they're used to delivering services. That's what their kind of reason for being is. And as more and more local government organisations are finding that themselves in financial difficulty, they're having to rethink how do they approach the delivery of their services. And service design isn't a magic wand. It's not an easy thing to do, but what it does is it can help you to evaluate what it is that you're doing and to challenge, are we doing that in an effective and efficient and accurate, high quality way? In the commercial sector, I think there's a realization that for certain organizations that their projects are sometimes delivering similar solutions to do an ever so slightly different variant of a thing that they can already do. I know of one bank that I worked in, had 36 different services for collecting debt. Now, each one was the result of a project that delivered under a time, cost and scope boundary. When you add all of those 36 variations of those services together, it's a spaghetti mess. And there's no standardization, there's no assurance of the customer outcomes. From a regulatory and compliance perspective, should things change in the way that organization's expected to collect debt, you've got 36 different places where you need to change things. So there's a kind of a dawning on organizations that if we keep delivering projects without thinking about customer need and organizational outcomes, that might not be getting us to where we want to be in terms of being an efficient, agile, customer-centric organization that can do the things that we promise. The other thing I just want to touch on, and I think this is a part of a driver, there's some work obviously in the space of digital, and Chris was mentioning this, and there's a realization that unless we adapt and think through new value propositions and how we might deliver them, and the new technologies allow us to do that we might be left behind. And I'm looking at the work of Jeannie Ross, particularly when she looks at digital transformation as a means of extending value propositions to make your customers more delighted with what it is that you offer. And it gives competitive advantage, and it makes the customers happy if you can do it well. But organizations are trying to learn, how do they do that? And service design is part of the answer, I would suggest. The other drivers that I'd say have impacted and influenced service design recently: recognition of the service designer role in particularly UK government standards. There's a increased recognition through professional qualifications, and then more recently, just in the last few months, there's the launch of the new apprenticeship standard for service design. And it's kind of, this is a professional discipline that's starting to build momentum, and I think it's an exciting place to be in the service design profession, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go straight back to you with kind of a follow-up question on that, Jonathan. So you mentioned about kind of other disciplines within the business and other projects and other scope. Where does service design sit in terms of already established internal business units or functions, and between that and the customer experience, customer facing side of things? Where does it sit, and kind of what benefits does it offer? I know we've touched on that already, but what's your thoughts on that?
So my background's in business analysis and business architecture, so I'm going to give an answer relative to my context and background. But one of the things that I'm going to say as I give my answer is that different professionals are going to have a different view of service design depending on their background. So I see service design as a profession that is maturing and it's new. And I see it as a collective of services. So I'd say that service designers are involved in, for example, service experimentation would be a service that I'd say a service designer offers. Investigation of problems is a service that a service designer offers. Service deployment is a service that a service designer offers. And I'm using a framework here that comes from service science and is linked to the business analysis service framework. And what myself and my colleagues have done is we've published a framework for service design consultancy, and you can find that on our website. We can share the links after today's webinar. But there's a lack of role clarity relative to service design, and we're seeking to try to make sure that there is role clarity. One of the things that I sometimes do when I think about service design is think about products in an organization, and then think about, well, the service designers looking across those products. What's the combined value proposition of the organization across those products? And then the other way that I can think about what is service design relative to some of the other professionals is that it is a professional discipline that's really focused on why are we doing what we're doing? What is it we're doing? How best might we do it? Who should be doing the work, where and when? So I'm using Mr. Kipling's 6 Wise Men there. So any other profession that's also looking at those questions might have an interest in service design. And from my view, business architects and business analysts are really keen to answer those questions, as are enterprise architects and quite a few other professional disciplines as well. But I'll stop there because I know I could keep talking. But hopefully that starts to answer the question, Andrew. Yeah,
absolutely. And Pip, what do you think on that? Where does it sit in terms of the wider business?
If you're talking about where functionally it might sit within an organisation, I'm afraid I'm not a good person to ask, because I'm very much of the opinion that it doesn't matter where it sits as long as it performs its function. And I feel the same about business analysis. I feel the same about all those kind of professions, which actually they sit everywhere and nowhere all at once because they are pan organisation. So for me, the importance isn't the function in which it sits, it's the mindset of the leadership team that enables it to happen. So for example, in talent, I'm just about to start a new role. They've created new business analysts role that look across the organisation. This is a first for talent. It's very new and very exciting. It's sitting in IT because that's where the vision and the drive for it has come from. It could equally sit in an operational unit. It could equally sit in strategy. It could equally sit in engineering. But so for me, it's less about what the service, what the job titles are, or what the team is called, or what the function is that it sits in. It's the desire and the facilitation of that as a capability in the organisation. I agree wholeheartedly with Jonathan. I'm a business analyst that by job title, and I engage in service design work. I will be working alongside an enterprise architect. I also, in our business analysis professionals community at work, we have all sorts of people in there. We have project managers, we have product managers, we have people whose job title doesn't suggest they do any kind of business analysis or change or service design, but they absolutely do. They're part of the community that does this work. So insofar as that is a non-answer, that is my answer to your question.
No, that's absolutely fine. And Chris, what are your thoughts?
I'd like to just pick up on and agree with the point Jonathan made, that distinction between product and service. And that, I think, is probably the driver for the relatively recent focus on service design within, for example, within the UK government space and within the government digital service space. I think it's I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's tempting to focus on products. And it might be that you want to create a new product because it seems exciting and it's whizzy, or you identify a gap in the market. You think, okay, this product is gonna fill that gap. It's very easy to kind of spin up a product team to be able to do that. So you might have like the product designers, or if it's a digital thing, like UX designers, interaction designers, or content designers, product managers, business analysts. You can put together a team to focus on that product. But it's really important that we also think about how any interaction with that product, from a user's perspective, from a customer's perspective, how that fits into a wider journey within the services that you provide. And so a service designer or somebody working in a service design space will not only have an eye and a kind of, I guess, like a foot in that product team and kind of understanding what that team's doing, but also have that kind of overarching view of how that new product fits alongside other products in that put together a related service. And in terms of obviously that's talking about it from probably like a digital product perspective, or maybe even a physical product perspective. But I also think there's a role for service design to play at pretty much in every level, in every context in an organisation. In government, and again, because that's my essentially my background, but in government, there's been a recent swell in kind of looking at creating like user-centred policies using service design approaches. So policy design can be done through a service design lens. And as I mentioned right at the top of this, organizational design can as well. So it's not just about the front end of our service, essentially the front door that our customers see, but also we can think about how we organize and structure our business and our organizations, again, through a service design lens, and identify exactly what it is that what problems are we trying to solve through the structure of our business, and take a service design approach to that. So as Pip said, I don't necessarily think it's like at this level or this level or this level. It's actually a mindset that we can take in solving pretty much any problem we might encounter in business.
That sounds good. I think before I move on to the next last lot of questions, I think I just want to remind the audience that you can pop questions in the questions tab at the bottom of your screen. We're going to move on to a bit more of the practicalities and kind of suggestions on how you can get started on kind of your own service design implementation. So now's a good time to pop the questions in, and we can answer them when we see them, or we'll have a Q&A portion at the end of the webinar as well. So moving into that then, kind of looking at what practical strategies or kind of methodologies can organizations adopt into kind of to initiate their journey in service design and kind of effectively integrate it into existing frameworks. I think I'll go to Pip for this one first again. So just to repeat that, kind of what practical strategies or methodologies can people adopt into their, initiate their service design journey?
So we're very new in our service design journey in our organisation, but the main thing that we've done that differentiates our service design journey from any other journey that we're on is that focus on our customers. And we've talked a lot about meeting the customer's needs, about that co-creation of value at that front end, about understanding what the customers want to achieve and helping them get there. We've talked less about the other end. You know, we've talked about the front end and as they go through the process, but that customer satisfaction piece and that the longevity of that customer satisfaction and how that turns into reputation. We've looked a lot at either end. So understanding who our customers are in detail. So using a lot of what I'm familiar with as business analysis tools, but things like empathy maps and things that really help personas, that help put you as the organization into the shoes of your customer. So that's a really good start. And then moving that on slightly into a more service design focused tool through customer journey mapping. So, deliberately asking your customers to engage in a series of activities to give you specifics, not just, it was okay, or I would have liked it if, but actually, what are you trying to achieve? How are you trying to achieve it? What really irritates you about what we do? What opportunities can you see through your eyes that we're blind to because we're inside of our organization? So being really specific and being really open to having that feedback. I think it takes, when you're starting on your journey, you have to be open. You have to be vulnerable to the information that you're going to receive. Because if an organization is going to be defensive, then there's little point in asking that question because you're not in the right place to be responding to it or to be taking it on board and doing some more analysis around it. So for my number one top tip, if you like, for starting your journey is engage with your customers. Firstly, yourself, understand within the organization who your customers are, but then actually go and test who you think your customers are with real actual customers and get them to help you identify how you identify your customers, because they're experts at being customers. That's what they do all day. We don't. And that's why we're going to, and that's why service design exists, because if we could do it all ourselves, we wouldn't need people doing service design because we'd be excellent at it, wouldn't we? So, for me, it's either end, is using either end of our organization activity, if you like, to really understand what those extras are that we need to do.
Chris, strategies and methodologies. What's your advice?
Everything above. So everything that Pip had said, I completely agree with. I think for me, from a practical perspective, that the biggest thing, I think, ironically, would be to start small. So often any kind of what is essentially a cultural change or a change in kind of mindset or approach can be quite a difficult sell, especially if you attend some webinars like this, maybe a conference or two, maybe read a book or watch some videos, you get really excited about it, and then you want to go and try and sell it into the organization. And I'm sure we've all been there in one way, shape or form, but it doesn't necessarily always land as you hope. So for me, it'd be starting small and relatively low risk, which means finding kind of like a small part of a service or an element of a service, and essentially observing users, going to users and observing them interacting with that part of the service. Now, obviously, depending on the nature of the business and the organization, that could be anything. It could be observing your users using your website or trying to buy your products online. If you have in the context of like a physical store, it would be essentially observing people in the store and seeing where they go, how they find different products. In a fast food restaurant, it might be observing, where people stand when they look at the menu, etc. So really kind of understand and learn about how people experience your service as it is now. Identify some things that work well, but more importantly, some things that don't work well. And then as collaboratively as we can, kind of come up with some ideas, essentially go through that kind of ideation process. And as Pip was saying, then test those ideas with our users. So we'll come up with a way that we think we might want to change this element, rather than just do it and potentially create some risk there. Let's kind of prototype that in some way and test it with our users or with our customers. And then obviously from that, if something works, great, let's implement it. If something doesn't work quite as well, that's okay. Let's let's look at what didn't work well, go through the same process and do these things incrementally. What it's about for me, at least in terms of the first steps, is demonstrating value as quickly as we can and getting people on board. Once you've done that, then it's about scaling and thinking, okay, well, what's the next thing? I would suggest that taking that sort of an approach rather than trying to redesign the entirety of your business and your business model to make it, to take a service design approach. So that is both high risk and also quite challenging. And perhaps if it's something that you feel that you need help or support with, there are lots of organizations and agencies and suppliers out there with experience in this stuff that would be able to help. So don't feel that you're alone. Take that risk, but start small and manage it.
I would add to that as well, Andrew, that when I talk about customers, I talk about internal customers as well as external customers. So when we're talking about understanding customers, and when Chris is saying about start small, you can look at an interaction between an operational unit and a central support service, procurement, HR, finance, IT, whoever it is, that is equally valid as going to customers that that are external to your organization. And that's where we've started, is in that, we're totally in control of that. It's totally within our organizational boundary. We've got people who are on board, but it helps us to practice and to demonstrate that value that Chris is talking about. But customers, I think it's a common misnomer that customers are only outside your organisation. I think there are a lot of customers that people miss because there are handshakes between all sorts of different functions and teams. And in that context, you have a service within your team and you're serving customers who are external to your team.
Jonathan?
So I 100% agree. Start small. Find something you can make an impact on. Hopefully where you could offer some value quite quickly through listening, learning, prototyping, modifying, and then going again. The other thing I'd mention that I think is really key in trying to do service design initially is don't blind people with science. That if you're curious about asking questions about what's good for the customer, what's good for the business, what's good for an employee, maybe a different type of stakeholder, and you're trying to do the right thing, I've not really met too many people that will tell you off for trying to do the right thing for customers or your organization. So be curious and ask questions. Practice using the tools. There's been a few that's been mentioned, customer journey maps and empathy maps and personas. Learn about those tools and practice using them so that you can build your confidence and competence in the use of those tools. Focus on priorities. Don't just go be looking at everything. You could quite easily get lost. And Chris, I agree with you. Try to do a top-down approach without support. And even with support, it's really challenging, but it could be extremely problematic. So you've got to be aware of your culture, the strategy of the organization, and the degree of support that you have to do the work. But focus on outcomes. Try and offer value as quickly as possible. You're not going to get it right first time. So you're going to have to be resilient. You're going to have to test and learn in your own approach. One of the other ways that I've seen organizations start to adopt the service design philosophy is, as Pip said, on internal services. And one of the services that they can start to think about is possibly the internal change service. So how do we deliver change in our organization? We can apply a service design lens to that. And what that does is it gives us a ground in which we can learn some of these tools that we've been talking about and others. But also it then gives us credibility when we're talking about how we might use some of those tools and the service design approach relative to the organization's external or even internal customers.
Excuse me. Absolutely. Well, that sounds really good. I think the next question then is going to go into a bit more practicality, some examples. I know we've touched on bits throughout all the questions, but can any of you share kind of any insights into successful implementations of service design, any particular challenges and kind of innovative solutions? I'm just going to kind of open that up, and whoever wants to jump in, go ahead.
Shall I jump in first then, Andrew? So I didn't know I was doing service design when I did this. It was so long ago. I was working in an IT department that wanted to reduce the number of software applications that it had. That was the CIO's main goal: reduce software applications. Anyway, I'm sat in a enterprise architecture function looking at this problem, and a project comes along and says, can I introduce a new service to do something really basic? And it was address lookup, where you put in a postcode into an online checker and it gives you a set of pre-validated formatted addresses. So they wanted to install a new piece of software when the CIO, the Chief Information Officer, wanted to get rid of these pieces of software. So I looked under the covers behind this service offering. It was a really small technology service, and I found that that organization had 16 versions of software doing exactly the same thing. And I was curious to ask, well, how much is that costing us? What do the contracts look like? What's the infrastructure? What's the support sat underneath these services? And then I talked with my colleagues. I wasn't doing this on my own, but talked to other folk that understood some of the complexity. And it cost me quite a few cups of coffee, and I had to buy muffins cake for someone to do a bit of digging for me. But I found out about the contracts, and what I proposed was a change that cost something in the region of £200,000, but it saved that organisation upwards of 2.5 million over the next 5 years. And it was because I was curious, and it was because I was thinking about customer lens and what's efficient. And I was thinking conceptually. I wasn't thinking address lookup is only those software applications. It's a concept, and it was being supported by many different variants. And I suppose the one thing that I was doing was I was focusing on the business case for the service. I'm looking at, if we do nothing, it's going to cost us £2.5 million to offer this really basic service. Because if we have a shared service to a common, consistent standard, we're going to save a lot of money in terms of money going out the door to external suppliers to provide a very basic thing. I then did the same thing on other internal services, and it started to snowball in terms of I developed a self-funding initiative that led to the creation and reuse of internal services. And these were IT services, but the same could apply onto any kind of service. So I sold it on the basis of finance and business cases relative to the context, and then people got interested in it. Was what happened in that example, at least, anyway.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I can talk through one, which is, to be frank, probably the biggest case study that I'm aware of, at least from the covers service design, which it's not that often, I don't think, at least traditionally, that we've been able to think or talk about the government as being kind of at the forefront of pretty much anything. But in 2011, the Government Digital Service was set up with the task to transform the way that public services are delivered. The idea being that it was trying to make things simpler, easier, faster for citizens, so people, but also for businesses, using digital technology in different and better ways. And it did all of the things that we've talked about. So it had a user-centered approach. So that kind of service design approach allowed them to focus on the needs and behaviours of people, of citizens, essentially their external customers and businesses that interacted with the wide variety of different government services. It collaborated, as Jonathan talks about a lot early on. So it collaborated across departments. So not only through doing user research and involving citizens and businesses, but it worked across lots of different departments to create standardized platforms and services, things like GovPay, which essentially enables all government departments to collect payment through one single system, whereas previously there would have been dozens, if not hundreds. GovVerify, which is essentially a verification tool that all of government can use, and in fact some of the private sector now use to verify people's identities, which led to kind of a sign-in process, or sign-in platform for people to be able to create accounts. And more recently, there's been a GovUK form, so essentially a form builder for a single form builder product for people to use. And it worked. It delivered these things and developed them iteratively. So a bit like I was talking about just now. So it was continually gathering feedback from users to kind of refine and improve those services over time. And some of those solutions are to Gov.uk, the website, which is continually evolving and is now nothing today. It looks nothing like it did when it was first launched. But that single website is now known widely as being the single place to get information about government services. And whilst there's a lot on there, it's maybe isn't perfect. That replaced what was previously nearly 2,000 websites. So the idea, like the service design approach, the idea of Gov.uk was essentially to remove the need for citizens to understand how the business works. So our external customers, our users, shouldn't need to understand how we choose to structure ourselves. And this is obviously this is a government example, but this applies across the piece. They shouldn't need to be experts in our business. They should be able to do whatever they need to do whatever they want to do, quickly and easily, without knowing which department to go to or which email address to send a thing to or which telephone number to call. There should be like a single front door and a way to access whatever service they need to from there. And the other thing in terms of the solution was to create the service standard, originally the digital service standard, which is now just a service standard, and like an assessment process. I'm not going to go into loads of detail like the outcomes, but in terms of cost savings, which is usually the things that are most important, right? Getting data on this is tricky, but between 2012 and 2015, so in those 3 years, they've Gov.uk, or the government digital service, were able to evidence that they saved £5.56 billion. So £5.5 billion of public money in 3 years. The biggest was in spend controls, in controlling the way that government departments spent money on technology and projects. But over 60 million was just on websites. So taking down or replacing those nearly 2,000 websites with one consolidated digital presence saved just over 60 million in 3 years. Not looked at haven't got access to the data kind of in the interim, but for the plan for 2022 to 2025, obviously, which we're a long way through, it's estimated there'll be another £1 billion saved there. So obviously this is at scale, right? And if there was anywhere to make efficiency savings, arguably government was the place to do it. But that was all achieved and all done through this service design approach.
I'm not sure I want to follow that.
Sorry, Pip.
Yeah, no, you're not. I'm just thinking I've got very small examples of where we've gained efficiencies and whatever. I think the biggest example from my career, though, is again prior to my life as a business analyst, when I was working in local government, and I procured a new contract for a service, basically to have our traffic lights installed and maintained. And at my instigation, we took a different approach to our performance regime, which instead of telling the contractor how to do their job, acknowledged that the contractor was the expert in doing their job and that we had performance expectations as a result of that. And whilst that doesn't fit neatly in the way that we're talking about it today, it demonstrates that from a customer's point of view, if you are able to articulate what the desired outcome is, you put the organisation in the best place to arrange its service. So there we wrote our specification, which had all the safety standards in there and had all sorts of requirements in there that I had gathered in collaboration with my colleagues throughout the council, from environmental waste and accessibility, all sorts of places. And that articulation of our requirements, together with the performance regime that said, you are the experts, as long as the lights are working for 95% of the time, fill your boots, you decide how you're going to resource it, you decide how you're going to prioritize the faults. You decide, what equipment you're going to use. It just showed that the organisation, the contractor that ultimately got the work, had that freedom to design the service to us in the way that they were best able to deliver it. And I think that, that was 10 or 12, maybe more years ago now. But that at the time was very new and very revolutionary way to go. Instead of saying you've got 2 hours from the point at which I tell you there's something wrong with my traffic lights to the point at which you fix it, I just said, fill your boots, do whatever you want, as long as it's working over the course of 12 months, 95% of the time, that's your call. It was really quite new, and there was a lot of skepticism in the organisation, and for a lot of the people that we worked with, the police and the RNIB and all sorts of people. But it worked well, and it shows that actually releasing some of those constraints that you artificially place on yourself can make a big difference to the performance that you gain, and a big difference to the money that you need to spend in order to get requirements that you've put in because you think they need to be there, not because it actually describes what you want to achieve.
Just a question for me then, if you guys were going to recommend any additional reading or resources that people can go to enhance their service design or get started on their journey, any suggestions?
I would have to say to do the certified service design qualification. I think it would be mightily remiss of me if I did not say that. And the reason I say that is because it opens it for me. It validated what I was already doing, but it also gave me permission to release myself from the constraints that I'd otherwise put myself in. So the tools and the techniques that are part of that service designer's toolkit are basically say, if you've put any kind of artificial constraint in there, then you're not doing it right. The whole leave your preconceptions at the door and go all out to design think properly. It was really powerful for me. So I would definitely explore, the qualification itself, but that because it gives you access to those tools and techniques to get your head in the right place to be doing the work.
Pip's the world's first certified service designer as well, so it's nice that Pip has said that the qualification is worthwhile. So thanks, Pip.
No worries.
For anyone who particularly enjoys reading stuff in physical books rather than online, which is really easy for us to do now. So I've got a range of kind of books dotted around. I've got some here, but I've also got some in front of me, some here. The one that never leaves my desk is, and I'm not on any sort of commission, by the way, is Good Services by Lou Downe. It's not big, which is good for me because I'm not a massive reader, but I genuinely look at this at least a couple of times a week just to remind myself of some really basic, simple principles and rules to follow. I say rules in a very unstructured sense. Lou Downe was quite heavily involved in some of the early GovUK stuff that I talked about earlier. And a lot of Lou's work is still quite evident in the GovUK service manual and the service standard, which essentially have, obviously it's intended for government, but the principles in it apply pretty much in any sector.
And I'd say to people to come along to the service design conference, Andrew, which is obviously coming up in April. So that would be my addition. But yeah, read, be curious, watch and listen to podcasts, talk to other professionals, and have a go. There's nothing that could stop you from drawing an empathy map from a customer experience that you've had as an individual or as an employee. Have a practice at creating customer journey map. Just be curious and have a go, do the reading and find out, obviously, but don't be afraid to try some of these tools and techniques in these ways of thinking.
And to ask the community, I mean, LinkedIn is a fabulous place. There's all sorts of people on there that do all sorts of jobs. And if you reach out on LinkedIn and say, I'm exploring this, anybody got any nuggets of advice, there will be more than plenty of responses of people able to point you in in the direction of YouTube videos or books or people to talk to, or, you know, webinars to listen to. There's a whole wealth of information out there, and you just have to, you know, you just have to ask.
Great stuff. We've just come up to time as well. We've got no questions that have come in, so I assume that means we've covered everything fully and completely. But this has been recorded. It'll be available on demand afterwards for those who either want to watch it again, or for new people. But I just want to thank everybody for their thoughts and obviously making this happen. And I'll speak to you all soon. Take care, everyone.
Lovely.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Andrew.